Greetings, friends. Wanderingruski here, and this is the weekly Russian-Ukrainian War update for the week of January 29th through February 4th of 2024. This week we're going to be we've seen some small advances. So we're going to be talking about these small advances along the entire front. Now, before I begin, I apologize. There's a giant storm going on where I am, so if you hear some sort of thing in the background, that is what it is. So, but without further ado, let us begin in Avdiivka. Now, Avdiivka is finally starting to see cracks opening up in its line of defense where Russians have been able to exploit it. So this week, as we mentioned last week, the Russians made a breakthrough here and managed to capture the Tsar's hut and managed to capture this neighborhood right here in the residential area. However, now the focus is actually in the north of Avdiivka. So geolocated footage showed Ukrainians attacking Russian positions in this area, meaning that the Russians have captured, I think this is called the Ivanivska dachas, the northern dachas of Avdiivka here. And the Russians are basically right here. Now, it's like, how much is this? Are these just forward troops? Or how are these how fortified is this area is the question, so that's the big question. But regardless, there's no Ukrainians here because the Ukrainians have been trying to push the Russians out of here, and so the Russians managed to capture this dacha area, and basically what this means is that all Ukrainian defenses to the north of this lake right here, which they were using to try to attack up here towards Visola, I think is this little village right here, that has collapsed. They can because of the expansion of Russian troops from Kamyanka, that's reaching towards the eastern edge of this lake, and then on the western edge of the lake here, meaning that this area is cut off. Now, Russian troops aren't there's been no geolocated footage of Russian troops here, but a lot of sources are saying the Ukrainians are retreating and kind of using this lake as a new defensive barrier, just as after the collapse of the Tsar's hut, the Ukrainians are now withdrawing and using kind of like this school and this tuberculosis dispensary as kind of like a new, to link up and have a new defensive line. And so this allows the Russians to enter the residential area of Avdiivka from the north. And thus, so let's talk about this in kind of a little bit of a big picture. So again, originally the Russians wanted to kind of link up these two areas to encircle Avdiivka and put the squeeze on and force the Ukrainians out. However, Ukrainians were been able to basically mine these entire fields here, preventing the Russians from reaching Tonika and Servina from the south. And while the Russians had more success in the north, where they reached the rail line and managed to have a small bridgehead near Stepova, the Russians have not been able to expand out of Stepova. It actually looks like fighting in the fields is much worse than fighting in the city, even though the city has more defenses for the Ukrainians. So this is what we're seeing. So the Russians have refocused their tactics in basically assaulting Avdiivka directly. And that is actually now paying off with some gains. And so what they're now hoping to do is basically link up the Russian movements in the north with the Russian movements in the south. And basically take the residential area of Avdiivka, and the only places that will be left is the coke plant right here and the 9th district right here. Because not only are they on the more of the western side of the village, of the town, but also they're very strong. They're very strong to defend and easier than the residential area. So, these are going to be the last kind of strongholds of Avdiivka. But what the Russians are hoping to do is link up the north and south to capture the residential area of Avdiivka. So now the northern sector is kind of linked with this lake. And there's two defense points you need to figure out. This quarry sand pit, sand quarry or whatever, right here. This is where the Ukrainians have fallen back to. And also this area right here. You can kind of see it on the maps here with this giant fortification on the highway here. This is where the Ukrainians are at, and that prevents the Russians from breaking through from the north here. I think what prevents the Russians from just entering Avdiivka from here is that there's a lot of supply lines in the back here, and they need to have, I guess, a more firmer defense, like a more solid defense before they can continue expanding into the north here. So that is what they're doing. They're clearing up this area and securing their defenses here along this river. So the Ukrainians are still have ways to hold the Russians back from the north, but again, the defenses are crumbling. Not only that, the Russians managed to expand out of this area and managed to enter the forest to the north of the Donetsk filtration plant. This is the last Ukrainian pre-2014 defense point that the Ukrainians have to prevent the Russians from entering in the south. So they're now, not only is it threatened from the south here because of the capture of the industrial area and the potential for it to be cut off from the Russians attacking from here, but also now the Russians are trying to attack from the north here. And if these two strong points here fall, then the Donetsk filtration system is going to be in a very big trouble. So we'll see if the Ukrainians could hold the Russians back in the east here. The Russians still hold the gains they had from 2 weeks ago, but they haven't really expanded their gains here. I think they're right now just consolidating. Well, one thing they have expanded out of is in this area right here. So the ex-air defense base right here is there's a lot of people are still wondering if it's captured or not. So no one knows if it's fully under Russian control, if the Ukrainians still control it, if it's in the gray zone. So, but what we do know is that from sources that are saying that the Russians have basically expanded to the west of it and captured this area right here, and basically are trying to secure themselves better so that once they do fully control the ex-air defense base, they could have a better position here. There was footage of the Ukrainians getting bombed in this area. So again, the Russians are trying to collapse this kind of small pocket here with their gains here and push them all the way back to the 9th high-rise district. However, so far the Ukrainians are holding their lines in this area and in this area as well. You could actually kind of see the trenches and things here. So the Ukrainians are still holding on in the south here. They do not want to give up. They are still trying to build a new defense line in the south, as well as in the north. They want to basically hold off the Russians until they have a good enough defense that they could fall back on. So small gains are happening, but the Russians are slowly creeping into Avdiivka from many sides, and it's just a matter of time before Avdiivka falls. My guess is probably sometime in May that it will fall. But, slow and steady so far. But, Avdiivka is still the main focus of Russian operations. We're now actually going to move up to the Oskol, the Luhansk front. As I mentioned last week, I believe, the Russians made an expansion of their gains here and took the village of Avdiivka here. And not only did they fully capture this village, they managed to capture the hills around this village right here. And they also expanded out south from Krokomolina here and towards the village of Berestova. So they did capture another village this week. However, I just wanted to say that they still have held on from Ukrainian counterattacks. They managed to actually improve their defenses here. Now it seems the Ukrainians have a very strong defense line in Pishana here. And they're also and Berestova. They're trying to these are the two villages that basically prevent the Russians from reaching the Oskol. But it seems like the main push that the Russians are now doing is trying to encircle the Ukrainian defense point node of Klishivka and Krotorovka here. And basically, the Ukrainians have been using these two villages as a defense node so that the Russians cannot just reach the Kupiansk, which is the main goal of this entire operation, to reach Kupiansk from the south. So with this breakthrough in the south and being able to hold it, the Russians have the ability to attack from the south here and cut off these villages and collapse it, and then the Ukrainians basically have nothing besides fields. Now it's going to be hard to attack through these fields, but it's going to be hard for them to defend as well in the fields. It's going to be hard to attack through them because the Ukrainians could attack the Russians in the open fields as they try to reach Kupiansk. But not only that, is that they could also reach. But it's easier to defend the Russians from getting there in the first place by just holding this defense node right here. So the Russians being able to continue holding this kind of small area in the south of it and the hills around it is bad news for the Ukrainians. So we'll see if the Russians are able to finally collapse this defense node of villages. But yeah, this week basically they just expanded and made their defense in Tabivka a bit more secure with the capture of the hills right here. And also a part of the Luhansk front down near Liman, there's been some movement towards Yampolovka and Terny. The Russians are continuously, now you could see, if you remember this map from like 2 months ago, 3 months ago, basically this entire area, the front line was basically along the Donetsk-Luhansk Oblast border, and then there was this like Torskoye salient right here, where there was this big intrusion towards Torskoye here. However, now this no longer is a Torskoye salient. The Russians have been able to capture this amount of land, and this week they actually managed to continuously advance along, take this area. It's hard to explain here. But basically, they've been able to get closer to Yampolovka and Terny, and sources are saying they could see these villages with their bare eyes. So the Russians are trying to reach, as I mentioned, the Zhirbets River here. And basically, once they reach Terny and Yampolovka, they could attack to the north and collapse the Ukrainian defenses in this, because the Zhirbets River goes along this area if you follow my mouse. And so if they could attack from the north, they don't have to attack Ukrainian defenses directly. They could attack them from the south. So we'll see how the Russians could continue their advancements towards Terny and Yampolovka. So small gains towards their small crawls, but still gains nonetheless. No changes in the Seversk front. It seems like on the Bakhmut front, the Russians and the Ukrainians are in a positional battle. The Russians are still, there's been clashes over these hills back and forth. There's clashes along the hills in Bogdanovka that prevent the Russians from continuously advancing. So Ukrainian resistance basically has devolved this front into a positional fight. So, you know, we've talked about this weekly, so I won't regurgitate it, but the Russians have a few key defense points here that they need to take. This hill right here, the Popovsky Forest and Cemetery right here, and this hill right here. And so these hills are what's getting fought over, because the control of these hills would allow the Russians to take Bogdanovka, which is a stepping stone towards reaching Chasiv Yar. But the Ukrainians continuously hold on and prevent the Russians from having any major gains. So no side made any real gains this week in Bakhmut, but it's kind of positional, so there's a lot of clashes. In the Gorlovka front here, it seems like the Ukrainians are using this to have a small-scale like raids here to try to basically distract the Russians in Avdiivka and Bakhmut, because those were the two areas the Russians have been mostly focused on besides Kupiansk. And so this sits right in the middle of them, and so they're trying to distract the Russians because the Russians don't have as much troops here. We talked about Avdiivka. In the South Donetsk area in Marinka, the Russians have actually managed to. Right now, the Russians are trying to focus on going along this reservoir. The main Ukrainian defense is in the center of Grigoriivka. However, in the southern edges of Grigoriivka, the Russians are basically using the reservoir as a good way to defend their flanks. However, besides that, the Russians are actually trying to capture this hill right here, because this hill gives control over the fields to the south of this reservoir right here. And as I mentioned, the short-term goal of the Russians is to reach this reservoir as not only to create defensive point, but also to be able to start attacking the supply routes of Krasnogorivka from the behind. And this will and this will give them a good defense point here. But in order to do that, they need to capture this hill. And this week, not only are they starting to advance along this tree line, they also managed to go along. The Russian troops entered this area right here. So it looks like the Russian troops are taking this tree line to the south of this hill. And so attack from like two directions will probably be where the Russians will be will storm to try to take this this hill. So, Grigorievka needs to be taken to keep pushing Ukrainian artillery away from Donetsk, but there's nothing else really to, and the Russians are making gains, but slow and steady again. In Novomikhailivka, the Russians managed to take full control of what they call the Zhirvets stronghold in this area right here. This prevented the Russians from encircling Novomikhailivka from the north, and because of that, instead of being able to take Novomikhailivka directly, which ended in failure, the Russians are now trying to. They took this tree line, and basically this attack in the fields north and south of Novomikhailivka has brought the Russians some success. As you can see, the result of these gains in the fields has led to the semi-encirclement of Novomikhailivka. However, because of that, it's out in the open fields. There's been a lot of losses with Russian armored vehicles here, so it's taken a toll for sure. And the Ukrainians are still stubbornly defending Novomikhailivka, which prevents the Russians from continuously going along these villages here. So we'll see how that expands. So far, some gains in the fields here, but the village itself is still under Ukrainian control. No changes in Ugledar. There's actually been some changes in the South Donetsk area right here in Staromayorsk and Urozhaina, mostly towards the north of Pryutia. It seems like the Russians have now managed to capture the fields to the south of this reservoir right here, and the goal seems to be to use these reservoirs to the north here as a defense point, because capturing these allows them to hold Pryutia a lot better. So, and the goal seems to not only defend their flank better here, but also to put more pressure on Ukrainian defenses in Staromayorska here, which are defended with only this road and this road right here from Rovin uphill. So again, we talked about this a long time ago, a few months ago, when the Ukrainians were on the attack here. But if the Ukrainians wanted to continue towards Staromalinovka here, they needed to take the flanks here, and the Russians know that, so they're trying to improve their defenses in the west and east here. So small gains to the north of Pryutia, trying to reach where they reach this small river here, well, this kind of reservoir, and they're now going to try to reach this reservoir right here. There's been in the Zaporozhye front. There's been no changes really. Oh yeah, another thing. I'm also a bit sick. I think I have COVID, and I don't just mean that as in like, a lot of people at my work got diagnosed with COVID. So I didn't get tested for it because for some reason they don't have COVID tests. So, but from deduction, I probably have COVID. But I'm a bit better now because that happened earlier this week. But I still feel a little bit rough. Anyway, no changes there's still tactical positional fighting here, just like in Bakhmut. But it seems like the Ukrainians are holding this little bridgehead, this like salient better against the Russian attacks here. But no major changes on this area. So but there is attacks. I wanted to mention that. And then in Kherson, no changes in Krinky. The thing is with Krinky is that there's a small bridgehead here that holds about 100 Ukrainian Marines, and every time a Marine dies, they get replaced by more fresh meat. But while the Russians can just bomb and continuously grind down these Marines to dust, they cannot completely take this village back because of a uniquely strong Ukrainian defenses here with drones. So basically, the Russians are like, okay, we can't completely clear this bridgehead, so we're just gonna make Krinky be this meat grinder for the Ukrainian Marines. There's basically no purpose of this anymore. The Ukrainians aren't going to gain anything from this operation in Krinky. It's just a PR operation, and to be honest, it's not even doing that job because no one really gives a shit about it. In fact, people are like, why are you being such a retard about it? So I'm expecting for them to just fall back eventually because it has no purpose. Anyway, so that's the changes on the front. As I explained them, there's not much. There's been small gains everywhere. Nothing big that like changes the battlefield even at a tactical level. Some gains, but again, nothing too crazy. Again, that's what we should expect in this war. This is an attritional war. This is the reason why this is an attrition because of ISR at the strategic and tactical level. At the tactical levels because of drones, at the strategic level because of widespread, all the satellites and such like that. Everyone knows where the forces are. No one can do like a sneak maneuver to try to like do a sleight of hand, something like, hey, we have something up our sleeve that the enemy doesn't know that will cause them to collapse. Everyone knows exactly who's playing. Everyone knows what they're going to do. And basically, it's just a battle of wits. And because since the Ukrainians and the Russians are evenly matched in this, there's going to be no changes on the front because every side knows who's going to attack. Like, you could be equal in troops, but if you do a surprise attack, you could collapse the front. But no one can do surprise attacks because of ISR and because any attack is knocked out with drones at the tactical level as well. So if the Russians try to like put a force in Kupiansk, this will be seen a month or two in advance, so the Ukrainians can prepare. And then once they do attack, any tactical gains that the Russians will be checked by Ukrainian drones, as an example. Same thing happens with Ukraine if the Ukrainians want to attack. So that's why there's an attrition, and that's why gains are slow. So basically, it's just an attritional battle trying to improve your tactical positioning. So that's the end of this video. Hope you liked it. Like this video and share this video around. It helps this channel a lot. And subscribe to my channel if you want to see videos similar to this one. Comment as well your thoughts. And yeah, so mostly just like this video, subscribe, and check my other videos out if you want as well. So aim high and wander on.